Welcome back to the deep dive. And I have to be completely honest with you guys listening today. I spent the better part of last night just staring at the ceiling after finishing the reading for this one.
It is definitely a heavy stack of material this time.
Yeah, heavy is an understatement. You know when you get a stack of sources that doesn't just give you new information, but it physically rearranges the furniture in your brain?
I think the phrase paradigm shift gets thrown around way too much in our line of work.
But this one actually demands it.
It really does. It requires a complete reset of how you approach the concepts.
Exactly. Because usually when we sit down to do a deep dive, we kind of know what lane we're in. Like, if we were looking at a stack of sources on faith or theology, you expect the conversation to be about, I don't know, meditation.
Right, or rituals.
Yeah, rituals, the history of dogma, maybe the spiritual side of life.
The vertical relationship. That connection between a human being and the divine, which is almost always framed as private.
Personal.
Very personal and largely emotional.
Exactly. And then completely separate from that, usually in a totally different folder on my laptop, honestly, we have our economics stack.
Where we talk about taxes and inflation.
Supply chains, capitalism, the price of wheat, you name it. And in my head, and I think in most people's heads who are listening right now, those two worlds are entirely separate.
They are non-overlapping domains. You have your weekend spiritual self, and then you have your Monday morning business self.
Right, the compartmentalization is just baked into us. But the sources we are breaking down today,
They completely incinerate that divider.
they absolutely burn it to the ground. We are looking at a radical reinterpretation of faith today. Specifically, this is based on a deep textual analysis of Surah al-Baqarah, as well as several essays unpacking the Quranic concept of deen.
Alongside some really rigorous comparative studies pitting this socio-economic system against both capitalism and communism.
Yeah, and the central provocative premise of this entire stack, the mission for our deep dive today, is to unpack how these texts claim that loving God is not about emotion.
It's not about mysticism at all.
No. They argue it is actually about the specific architecture of an economic system.
Which is a fascinating premise. The central argument across all these essays is that you simply cannot separate the spiritual from the material.
You just can't.
They argue that what we call economics, how we distribute wheat, how we manage land, who controls the water, is actually the primary vehicle for what religious traditions call worship.
And the stakes they lay out are incredibly high. We aren't just talking about whether a tax rate is efficient or if the GDP is going up.
Far from it.
The texts explicitly argue that economic exploitation, things like monopolies, hoarding, billionaires controlling the food supply, that is literally a form of idolatry.
Which is a massive, massive statement to make.
It's huge, and it gets darker, because if a society gets this wrong, it doesn't just enter a recession. The texts describe the resulting state of existence as a living hell.
And we should be really clear for the listener here. The sources mean that literally.
Right, not metaphorically.
No, they aren't using the term hell or Jahannam just as a scary place in the afterlife. They're defining it as a state of societal collapse right here on Earth.
A diagnostic condition.
Exactly. A specific condition of human misery that we create with our own hands through unjust economic laws.
So our goal today is to unpack this concept of divine equity. We are going to look at why these sources claim rationality is actually more holy than emotion.
And why a monopoly is a theological crime.
Yes, and here is the kicker that really got me. Why the so-called innocent victims of a societal collapse might actually be guilty of a double punishment.
That last point is going to be quite difficult for some people to hear, especially in our current cultural moment, where victimhood is a very prominent lens.
But it is crucial to the argument. So if you are ready, let's dive into section 1.
Let's do it. Redefining faith.
Because before we get to the money, we have to understand the mindset these sources are operating from. They start by drawing a really hard line between two words that I and probably 99% of English speakers use interchangeably.
Religion and deen.
Right. If you stop me on the street, I would say they mean the exact same thing. But the text says they are opposites. Help me out with this.
In common parlance, yes, they are synonyms. But in the specific context of this Quranic analysis, the distinction between the two is the foundation of the entire economic argument.
Okay.
The sources describe religion, or in Arabic, mazhab, as something ritualistic, emotional.
Like how you feel on the inside.
Exactly. It is about the personal connection you think you have with the divine, usually in isolation. It is highly subjective.
So religion is me sitting in a quiet room, closing my eyes, feeling a connection, maybe chanting something.
Yes.
It is about my internal state.
Correct. And the sources argue that while that might feel nice to the individual, it isn't deen.
So what is deen then?
Deen is described in the texts as a system, a comprehensive structure of living. You could almost translate it as a constitution.
A constitution. So it's legalistic.
It is objective. It deals with the collective laws that govern society. It is not about how you feel in your heart. It is about how the society functions in reality.
One of the essays had this great line about how the universe operates on uniform laws. Can we get into that? Because normally when people talk about God, they talk about miracles.
They talk about the suspension of the laws of physics.
Right, like I prayed and the cancer vanished against all medical odds. We look for the divine in the exceptions.
We do. We tend to look for God when the rules break. But this interpretation flips the script entirely.
How so?
The sources argue that the universe, from the movement of the galaxies down to the photosynthesis in a single leaf, operates strictly on the law of cause and effect.
The uniformity of nature.
Exactly. Gravity does not care if you are a saint or a sinner. If you step off a cliff, you fall.
Gravity is an equal opportunity force.
The argument here is that these uniform laws, gravity, thermodynamics, biology, and yes, economics, are the habits of God.
The habits of God, that's a striking phrase.
They are the system he put in place. So according to the text, true faith isn't about believing in magic. It isn't about expecting God to break his own laws just because you ask nicely.
Right.
True faith is defined here as the rational observation of these laws.
So believing in gravity is an act of faith.
In this specific framework, yes. It is acknowledging the reality of the system created by the divine. It is submitting to the reality of how things actually work. In fact, the text explicitly says that the worst crime a human being can commit isn't skipping a ritual. It isn't wearing the wrong clothes.
What is it?
It is suspending their intellect. The term they use is akal o fikr.
Akalo, fikr, intellect and thought.
Right. The text argues that if you turn off your brain, if you stop asking why and just follow things blindly, you are violating the core tenet of the faith.
You are rejecting the primary tool you were given to navigate reality.
Exactly. It is a dereliction of duty.
This is so interesting because it positions blind faith as a massive negative. And I feel like in a lot of traditional contexts, questioning is highly discouraged.
It's often seen as a lack of devotion.
Right. You hear, just believe. Don't ask too many questions. Have faith. But these sources are saying that blind acceptance is literally a sin.
You look closely at the source text, it constantly emphasizes phrases like, do they not think? Do they not reason? Do they not observe?
It's demanding engagement.
Because the premise is that the divine system is entirely rational. It works like a machine. If you understand the mechanics, you understand the creator of the machine.
And if you ignore the mechanics...
If you ignore the mechanics and just hope for the best, you are going to get crushed by the gears. The law of cause and effect will take you out.
Which brings us to their definition of love, because this was the part that made me stop and reread a few times. It seemed so cold at first glance, but then it clicked and made perfect sense.
The question of how one loves God.
Right. The source asks, how can you possibly love God? You can't hug him. You can't sit down and have a coffee with him.
It is a profoundly logical question. We are human beings. Our emotions are evolved strictly for human interaction.
Yeah, biological interaction.
We love a child because we can hold them, we can see them smile. We love a spouse because shared experiences, touch, conversation.
It's reciprocal. I smile at my kid smiles back. I get a hit of dopamine. It is a biological feedback loop.
Exactly. And the source argues that applying this same emotional biological definition to an unseen infinite creator is a massive category error.
A category error.
It leads straight to mysticism. People start imagining a personal God they can chat with, essentially projecting their own ego and emotional needs onto the divine.
And the text dismisses that.
It dismisses it as a hallucination, a delusion.
So if I can't feel love for God in that warm emotional sense, what am I actually supposed to do? The source used this agricultural analogy that I thought was just brilliant. The grain.
Yes, the hab.
The hab. Can we walk through that?
It is a beautiful grounding metaphor. Imagine a farmer. This farmer desperately wants a harvest. He loves his crop in the sense that he's entirely dedicated to its growth.
He wants that wheat to rise.
Right. Now, how does he express that love? Does the farmer love his crop by sitting in the middle of the field, closing his eyes, and chanting poetry to the dirt?
I mean, he could do that. He could write the most beautiful sonnet about weed ever written.
He could.
But he is going to starve to death in the winter.
Exactly. Because the field does not care about his poetry. The field only cares about hydrology, nitrogen levels, and sunlight.
It only cares about the laws of nature.
So the farmer loves the crop by obeying the laws of agriculture. He tills the soil, he plants the seed at the exact right time. He waters it according to its needs, not according to his own mood.
He subordinates his own well to the system.
He submits to the laws of nature. And if he follows that system rigorously, what happens?
He gets a harvest.
He gets a tangible result. That harvest is the physical proof of the connection between the farmer's effort and the divine law of growth.
And the source is arguing this is how we love God.
It argues this is the only way a human can love God. You cannot benefit God directly. He doesn't need your help. He doesn't need your praise.
But you can benefit his creation.
Yes. So, love equals obedience to the system. Steadfast obedience to the laws that sustain life.
When you follow the divine law, specifically the laws regarding equity and justice, which we are about to get into, that action is the act of loving God.
It is highly functional. It is not sentimental at all. You see the results in a flourishing society, just like the farmer sees the results in a harvest.
That is just so much more practical than just trying to conjure up a good feeling. It turns faith into a verb. It turns it into actual work.
It turns it into a concrete responsibility. You cannot just feel faithful while your neighbor down the street starves.
Because the starvation of your neighbor is the proof that you have violated the laws of the system.
Exactly. It is proof that the farming has gone wrong. The mechanics are broken.
And here is where it gets really interesting and honestly a little dangerous for the status quo. If loving God means following his system for sustaining life, what happens when we start talking about money?
This brings us to section 2.
The economics of idolatry.
This is the absolute crux of the argument across all these texts. And we have to define a couple of specific terms first, because the sources use them in a very precise way.
Let's start with risk.
Risk.
That translates to provision, right,
Yeah.
or resources.
It does, but it is much broader than just your weekly paycheck. Risk refers to the Earth's resources in totality. Food, water, land, the fundamental means of sustenance.
Okay.
And the sources are absolutely adamant about one core principle. God created risk for all humanity collectively.
This is such a pivotal concept to grasp. The text argues that the Earth wasn't created for the top 1%.
Yeah.
It wasn't created for a specific royal family or a multinational corporation. It was created explicitly for all the creatures, every single one of them.
It is treated as a baseline, undeniable assumption. Think about it. The air, the water, the innate capacity of the Earth to grow food. These are not human inventions.
Right. No billionaire sat in a lab and invented the process of photosynthesis.
No corporation invented the concept of water. These things are given. Therefore, they belong to the species as a whole, not to individuals to hoard.
So the baseline assumption of this entire economic model is that access to the means of survival is a birthright of the human species.
Correct. Now, to be clear, the texts say you can possess the fruit of your labor. If you work harder or smarter, you earn more, and that is fine.
You can have the apples you picked.
Yes, but you cannot possess the source itself in a way that blocks others from it. You cannot own the river. You cannot fence off the only well in town.
Okay. And that perfectly sets up the second term, which is essentially the main villain of this entire philosophical framework, and did.
And dead. This is the plural form of the word nid.
And that usually translates to idols, right? Or rivals to God.
Yes. And normally, when you and I hear the word idols, our minds go straight to stone statues.
Right, the golden calf.
Or, if we're being metaphorical, we think of celebrity worship. Or a personal obsession with money.
Like, don't idolize your bank account. We hear that kind of preaching all the time.
But the sources take a very hard left turn here. They argue that the andad are actually the economic elites.
Wait, let's pause here. I want to make sure you listening really get this point because it blew my mind. A billionaire isn't just a rich person in this text. They are literally classified as an idol.
The logic is completely rigorous if you follow how they define God in this text.
Okay, walk me through it.
What is the primary functional attribute of God in this specific context? He is the Rab, the provider, the sustainer of life. Every creature depends on him for survival.
Right. He is the one who feeds us.
Now, if a human being, or let's say a cartel, or a massive corporation, if they hoard the risk that was meant for everyone,
If they put a fence around the water.
or if they buy up all the grain in the region, or if they entirely monopolize the housing market, what have they actually done?
They've taken control of the provision.
They have usurped the role of the provider. They are claiming a prerogative that belongs solely to God. They are setting themselves up as the providers for the people.
I see. So if I control the entire food supply of a city, I essentially control who lives and who
You
dies.
hold their lives in your hands.
I become a god to the people who need that food.
Exactly. And this is the mechanism of control that the sources are warning about. When a few people gather the resources in heaps, the masses are forced into absolute dependency.
They have no choice but to obey the hand that feeds them.
And that obedience,
That obedience is the worship.
that is the idolatry. That is what the texts call shirk. The text argues that people stop obeying divine law, which demands justice, equity, and truth, and instead, they start obeying the whims of the wealthy elite just so they can survive.
Like a middle manager saying, I have to lie on this report because my boss told me to and I need the job.
Or a company overlooking a massive environmental safety violation because the shareholders demand the stock price go up.
You compromise your morals for survival.
Because the elite have become the ondad. You're bowing to them because they hold the literal keys to your survival.
That is just wild. It basically says that a market monopoly is a theological problem.
It is the ultimate theological problem in this framework.
Like, breaking up a monopoly isn't just a matter of good economics or good government policy. It is basically iconoclasm. You are literally smashing false gods.
It completely changes how we view poverty, too.
How so?
In this framework, poverty isn't just bad luck. It isn't just the natural result of abstract market forces.
Right.
Poverty is the direct mathematical result of idolatry. It is the result of someone usurping the role of the divine provider and hoarding what isn't theirs.
It really puts a whole new spin on the phrase, the love of money is the root of all evil. It suggests that you cannot be a monotheist in the true functional sense if you support a system of economic strangleholds.
Precisely. You cannot worship the God of freedom and equity while simultaneously being enslaved to the God of greed.
The two systems are completely incompatible.
You are either serving the Creator by ensuring that risk flows equitably to everyone, or you are serving the ondad by allowing accumulation and hoarding. There is no neutral ground here.
None at all. So let's play this out. Let's say we have a society where the Andad are fully in charge.
Which isn't hard to imagine.
Right. Resources are hoarded. The rich are getting richer. The poor are becoming entirely dependent. What happens next?
The sources describe a descent into a living hell.
Section 3, and again, I really want to emphasize this for everyone listening. They aren't talking about fire and pitchforks in the afterlife.
No.
They are talking about something happening right here on the pavement in our cities.
Jahannam. The sources interpret hell as a state of socio-economic collapse. It is the inevitable mathematical result of the law of cause and effect that we discussed in Section 1.
The machine breaks down.
Think about it like aerodynamics. If you violate the laws of aerodynamics, the plane crashes.
Gravity always wins.
If you violate the laws of economic equity, if you block the flow of blood in the body of society by hoarding all the resources in one place, the body dies.
And that death spiral, that societal necrosis, that is Jahannam.
Yes. And the texts actually break this down into specific phases. It reads almost like a medical diagnosis of a dying society.
Phase 1 is illusion.
Phase 1 is the deceptive calm before the storm. The Andad, the wealthy elites, are living comfortably in their gated communities.
They think they are untouchable.
They believe their power is permanent. They genuinely think their heaps of gold, their diversified portfolios, and their private security forces will protect them from the consequences of their greed.
They are drunk on their own accumulation.
And importantly, the poor are under an illusion during this phase too.
The weak classes.
Yes, the weak classes are under the illusion that these leaders actually care about them. Or, at the very least, they believe that blind obedience will buy them safety.
Like, if we just obey the job creators, if we just keep our heads down and work 80 hours a week, eventually we'll be safe.
It is the trickle-down illusion. If I just work hard enough for this guy, eventually a drop of that wealth will reach me.
But illusions cannot withstand the pressure of reality forever.
No, they cannot.
Yeah.
Eventually, the hoarding reaches a mathematical tipping point. The imbalance in the system becomes unsustainable. And then comes phase 2.
The crash. Now, the text uses a very specific Urdu word here that I had never heard before, but the definition was chilling. Afratafri.
Afratafri. It translates roughly to extreme chaos, panic, a stampede,
Right.
total and utter social disorder.
It describes a scene during this crash where, quote, mothers forget their suckling infants. And I remember reading that last night and thinking, okay, that is poetic drama. That's hyperbole to make a point.
But it isn't hyperbole. It is a diagnostic metric.
Explain that.
It is a metric for the total disintegration of human connection. Think about biology. The bond between a mother and an infant is the most fundamental, hardwired biological bond of care in our species.
Right. It's the baseline of humanity. Even in terrible times, a parent protects their child.
Exactly. But if a society becomes so economically desperate, so starved of resources, so fundamentally every man for himself, that a mother would abandon her own child just to save herself,
That is the absolute bottom of the pit.
that is the definition of hell. It means the fabric of society has completely unraveled.
It is the dog-eat-dog world, fully realized. No trust, no love, no community, just raw predation.
And that brings us to phase 3, which is where the psychological torture really sets in. Mutual resentment.
This was the part of the text that felt like a courtroom drama playing out in the middle of a burning building. It describes a screaming argument between the leaders and the followers.
It is a dialogue of absolute despair. The followers turn to the leaders, the Andad, in the middle of this chaos and say, we followed you.
We did everything you said.
We voted for you. We work in your factories. We bought your products. Now save us. Fix this mess.
And the leaders.
The text says the leaders completely disown them. They look at the masses and say, we have no connection to you today. We cannot even save ourselves. In fact, we are burning in the exact same fire that you are.
That betrayal. I mean, the realization that you gave your entire life, your energy, your obedience to a system that does not care about you at all.
That realization is the core of the suffering.
And the followers respond by saying, if only we could go back, we would disown you just as you are disowning us now.
But it is too late. The law of cause and effect is already run its course. The structure has collapsed. You cannot undrink the poison once it's in your veins.
Yeah. Okay, which brings us to the most provocative part of this whole stack for me, section 4. Because usually when we hear this story, the classic story of the greedy, rich elites and the suffering poor masses, we automatically look at the masses and say, oh, you poor victims.
Right. We view them with pure pity. We view them as entirely helpless pawns in a bad system.
But these sources, they do not let the masses off the hook at all. They actually flip the script and say that the innocent victims are guilty.
This is the twist of the whole philosophy. The text argues that the weak followers actually face a double punishment.
A double punishment. I have to say, when I read that, it seemed incredibly harsh. I mean, they are already starving. They are living in Afro-Tafri. Why punish them twice?
Because they committed the core crime that we mentioned all the way back in section 1.
Suspending the intellect. Aquil ofricker.
Exactly. The sources force us to ask a very uncomfortable mechanical question. How does a tyrant actually become a tyrant?
Well, usually he grabs power. He has an army. He has a lot of money.
But where does he get the army?
From the people.
An army is made of individuals from the masses. Where does he get his wealth? It is generated by the physical labor of the masses.
Right.
The central argument here is that a single tyrant, or even a small board of corporate elites, has zero actual power on their own. They're outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1.
If everyone just collectively said no, the tyrant is just a crazy guy yelling in an empty room.
Exactly. So logically, the masses are complicit. By refusing to think critically, by refusing to challenge the unjust status quo, by blindly following big personalities or ancestral traditions.
They enabled their own slavery.
They literally built the throne that the tyrant sits on to oppress them.
The text used a very striking analogy here about sheep.
Yes. It describes the masses walking with their heads down, their eyes closed, just blindly following the noise of the herd in front of them right off a cliff.
Just staggering into the slaughterhouse.
The source implies that God created you as a human being, a rational, thinking, observing agent. You were given the capacity for akal.
Intellect.
If you voluntarily degrade yourself to the status of a sheep, ignoring the reality of the economic hoarding happening right in front of you, you cannot complain when you get slaughtered like a sheep.
That hits so hard. So the double punishment is what exactly? Break that down.
Punishment 1 is the physical suffering itself. The hunger, the chaos, the Afro-Tafri. You have to physically live in the burning house you helped build.
And punishment 2.
Punishment 2 is the moral accountability, the crushing guilt. In the eyes of this divine law, you are not judged as a victim. You are judged as an accomplice.
Wow.
You had the numbers, you had the intellectual capacity,
Yeah.
and you chose to surrender it to an idol because following was easier than thinking.
Shared accountability. That is such a heavy concept. It completely strips away the standard excuses we all use.
I was just following orders.
Right. Or I was just trying to keep my head down and provide for my family.
It emphasizes that in this divine system, passivity is a sin.
Neutrality is complicity.
If you are neutral in the face of economic exploitation, if you are not actively thinking and resisting the hoarding of risk, you are actively gathering the firewood for Jahannam.
It reminds me of that famous quote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing."
Exactly.
But this text takes it a step further. It says, if you do nothing, you aren't a good man. You are an accomplice.
That is the harsh truth of the mechanics.
Okay, let's pivot, because we've painted a pretty bleak picture here. We have established that the current system of hoarding creates hell. We have established that blind obedience to that system is a crime. So what is the alternative?
The solution.
Right, because when people hear phrases like collective resources or no monopolies, their modern brains immediately jump to one word: communism.
And the authors of these sources completely anticipate that reaction.
Which brings us to Section 5, the divine equilibrium.
The sources go out of their way to explicitly distance this divine system from communism or state socialism.
Why? I mean, if the resources belong to everyone collectively, isn't that essentially the definition of communism?
The critical difference lies in the concept of regimentation versus choice. The sources argue that communism fundamentally fails because it imposes rigid regimentation on the population.
It treats humans like cogs in a machine.
It completely ignores the individual's soul and human nature.
The text had this amazing metaphor about prison food to illustrate this. I love this because it makes abstract economic theory so incredibly concrete.
It is a brilliant metaphor. So imagine you are in a prison, but in this prison, you get the absolute best food in the world.
Okay.
Let's say gourmet chicken pilaf.
Sounds great.
Every single day, you get it for free, you don't have to work for it, and it's nutritionally perfect.
I mean, I'd be happy for a week, maybe 2 weeks.
Here's the catch. You have absolutely no choice. You must eat the chicken pilaf.
Yeah.
You cannot choose a sandwich. You cannot choose to skip a meal. You cannot choose to eat at a different time of day.
Yeah. After a month, I am going to absolutely despise that chicken pilaf. I would probably dream about a stale crust of bread just because I was the one who chose it.
Exactly. After a year, that gourmet meal becomes psychological torture. It becomes a punishment.
Because it strips you of agency.
The source argues that human dignity fundamentally requires variety and personal choice. The human soul is designed to create, to prefer, to taste.
And communism kills that.
Communism, or any system of total regimentation, kills that spirit. It successfully feeds the stomach, but it completely starves the soul.
So how does this divine system solve this paradox? How do you have absolute economic equity without turning society into a giant, well-fed gulag?
It solves it by rigorously distinguishing between two concepts, halal and tayyab.
Okay, let's define those in this specific economic context.
Halal usually just means lawful in traditional context, but here it refers to the boundary or the baseline access.
The baseline access.
Yes. The halal aspect is the rule that the resources, the risk, must be open to all. No monopoly is allowed. The wheat, the water, the iron ore, it is accessible to the entire population.
That's the collective part that guarantees universal provision.
Exactly. The baseline is nobody starves. The societal pantry is always open.
But then you have tayyab.
Tayyab means pleasant or agreeable.
Mm.
In this economic framework, this represents individual preference and agency.
Okay.
So the system ensures mathematically that no one starves. That is the collective safety net. But inside that net, the individual is completely free to pursue whatever they enjoy.
So using the food analogy, the system guarantees that there is raw wheat and clean water available for every single person.
Yes.
But I get to choose if I want to use my share to bake bread or make pasta or maybe trade my share for something else entirely.
Precisely. You are free to pursue your specific tastes. You are free to innovate. You are free to be uniquely you.
But I am not free to buy up all the wheat in the silo so that my neighbor can't make anything at all.
Exactly. That is the boundary. That is the divine equilibrium.
The sweet spot.
It is the perfect balance between the chaotic, predatory selfishness of capitalism and the soulless, robotic uniformity of communism.
It is a society where the economic floor is incredibly solid universal provision, but the economic ceiling is entirely open for personal expression and innovation.
It respects the duality of human nature, It acknowledges that we absolutely need collective security,
Huh.
but we also desperately need individual freedom.
I mean, this sounds amazing on paper. It sounds like a utopia. But as we always have to ask on the deep dive, how do you actually build it in the real world?
Which brings us to Section 6, implementation.
Because implementing this requires a massive foundational shift in how our entire global society operates.
The sources don't just leave it as theory. They outline very clear structural action items. They refer to this as the architecture of success.
Okay, what is the first step?
The first, and undoubtedly the most aggressive action item is dismantle monopolies.
Tear them completely down.
Yes, the text treats monopolies not as examples of successful business acumen, but as literal idols. And yet,
We are back to the iconoclasm.
if a corporate entity or an individual controls a resource to the point where they can unilaterally dictate terms to the masses, that entity is engaging in shirk. They're playing God.
So society has a moral religious duty to dismantle that power structure, not just regulate it, not just tax it a little more.
Dismantle it entirely.
Right.
Break it up so the risk flows freely again.
It totally changes how you view antitrust law. It goes from being a dry, bureaucratic economic issue to a literal moral imperative.
It is the highest moral imperative.
What is the second action item?
Establish universal provision.
So a guaranteed baseline.
The economy must be structurally designed from the ground up to guarantee the basic needs of life for every single citizen.
And this isn't framed as welfare, right?
Not at all. It is framed as a fundamental right. It is simply their rightful share of the God-given risk.
The mindset shift there is huge. It isn't, look at us being generous, we are giving charity to the poor. The mindset is, we are legally restoring the rights that were previously stolen from the poor by the hoarders.
Exactly. It removes the stigma of poverty and replaces it with justice.
And the third action item, I think this ties back to the double punishment concept we discussed.
It does. The third item is cultivate rationality,
Education.
but a very specific type of education. The school system cannot just be about job training to produce better factory workers, and it cannot be about ideological indoctrination.
It has to teach aql o fikr.
It must teach people how to think critically, not what to believe.
But why is education listed as a core economic policy?
Because the system requires maintenance. If you manage to build an equitable economic system, but the population remains intellectually lazy, if they're still sheep, a new tyrant will eventually just trick them and take over again.
You cannot maintain a free, equitable society with a population of mental slaves.
You need a citizenry that is fully awake. You need an intellectual immune system to fight off any potential new idols that try to rise up.
That makes total sense, and the text describes the end result of a society that actually manages to implement all of this. It used a beautiful phrase.
It says such a society becomes soft like silk to its own people.
Soft like silk, meaning supportive, nurturing.
A place where the base level anxiety about pure physical survival is completely gone. People can be gentle and generous with each other because they aren't forced to fight like dogs for scraps.
But it isn't a weak society.
Not at all. The quote finishes by saying the same society is hard like steel against exploitation.
Hard like steel.
It has zero tolerance for the idol of greed. It is fiercely, aggressively protective of its equity.
And there was a divine promise mentioned at the very end of this section. A very pragmatic, results-based promise.
Yes. The source argues that if a society actually follows these laws, again, not out of mystical superstition, but out of rational, structural implementation, the Earth's treasures will open up to them.
And that isn't magic, it's just efficiency.
It is the ultimate efficiency.
Yeah.
Think about it logically. When you aren't wasting 50% of your society's human potential on grinding poverty.
When people have the energy to invent instead of just trying to survive.
When you aren't wasting massive amounts of resources on hoarding or wars over hoarded resources. When you aren't actively destroying the environment for short-term quarterly profit.
The natural abundance of the earth is fully realized.
It's the ultimate abundance mindset, but backed by rigid systemic structure.
It really connects all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. The love of God is proven by the tangible results.
A society that feeds everyone and frees everyone is a society that truly loves the creator of those people.
Wow. Okay, I think we need to take a breath and just zoom out for a second. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by redefining faith as a rational act of observing the universe. Then we realized that hoarding money is basically playing God and committing idolatry.
We saw how a society inevitably collapses into a living hell of chaos and betrayal when the resources are restricted.
We faced the really hard truth that the innocent followers are actually complicit in their own oppression because they chose to turn off their brains.
And finally, we looked at the practical model of divine equilibrium, that perfect balance of collective security with individual freedom.
It is just such a comprehensive worldview. It demands that we completely start compartmentalizing our lives.
You cannot be a good believer on Friday and a ruthless monopolist on Monday. The two identities are mutually exclusive.
It fundamentally challenges what it even means to be a spiritual person. I think usually we picture the highly spiritual person as someone retreating from the world, living quietly on a mountain somewhere.
Withdrawn from the messiness of society.
Right. But this stack of sources suggests that the most truly spiritual person is actually the one right in the middle of the marketplace. The one aggressively fighting for fair wages, dismantling monopolies, and ensuring open access to resources.
That is exactly the so what of this entire deep dive. Economic justice is framed here as the absolute highest form of spiritual obedience.
It is the physical manifestation of the divine law in the real world.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the end of our time today. And I want to leave everyone listening with that provocative thought we kind of hinted at earlier in the show. The concept of the double punishment.
It is a vital question for self-reflection.
It really is. I want you to think about your own life. Where are you blindly following? Where are you voluntarily suspending your own intellect just because it is easier to go with the flow?
Are you following a leader, a political party, or even just a general economic trend simply because everyone else is doing it?
Because if these sources are right, you aren't just a passive victim of a bad system.
You are the battery powering it.
And if we want to take this a step further into our modern world, think about the digital spaces we inhabit every day. Think about the algorithms.
That is a fascinating application of this text.
Right. Are we passively consuming endless feeds, completely suspending our oculofikr, our intellect? And in doing so, are we actively building massive digital empires for a new class of tech and dad?
We are trading our attention and our agency for convenience. We are bowing to the algorithm because it feeds us dopamine.
Exactly. And if that system eventually collapses our society, if it leads to a digital aftertafri, the plea of I didn't know or I was just scrolling like everyone else will not save you from the consequences.
The law of cause and effect will hold you accountable.
That is, well, it's terrifying, honestly, but it is also incredibly empowering.
It is empowering because it means we have the agency to stop it. We built the throne, which means we can dismantle it.
If we simply choose to think.
Precisely. The power is in the intellect.
Well, on that note, I am going to go do some very serious thinking about my own habits, probably starting with my grocery shopping and my tech usage. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly dense deep dive today.
It was my absolute pleasure. It is a heavy topic, but a completely necessary one.
Absolutely. Until the next deep dive, keep thinking and keep your eyes open.
Goodbye.